The fact that there are not more people that are disturbed. I mean, this stuff doesn't have to do with partisanship. Like, I don't really even understand the moment that we're in, where it is acceptable for any leader in any respect, let alone the president of the United States, after a tragic death, before having any information, and even if you had the information, the idea that you're like, yeah, it's basically because he was anti-MAGA, and it's almost like you're giving a pass for it.
Yeah.
And it's almost like there's a permission structure that if something happens to you, but you were anti-MAGA, it's okay. That is a problem. Like, as we are sitting here saying, hey, let's denounce political violence, he continues to kind of fan these flames or send these messages that if it's on behalf of this, then it's completely understandable. Like, I don't understand any of the tragic deaths that I have seen, no matter who it is that is dying in an untimely way. And frankly, I still struggle with some things that are technically timely, and ask questions about some of those deaths. And so the fact that this was someone beloved, and beloved or not, I just think it was inappropriate. I think it was an inappropriate thought, and it definitely was inappropriate to go out there and post publicly in this way, whether you're the president or not, would take this type of moment and let that be the conclusion that you come to. And when you think about, if this is where his head is, think about the very complicated issues that our president has to deal with. And if it's going to boil down to this kind of very simplistic, really concerning type of thought process, I mean, just wonder, it makes me wonder more about, like, where is our country headed? Flowing, I'll say it that way. I won't say it was going great. But being in the House, you know, I've been sitting there, and then the next thing you know, my name was put into a number of polls, you know, just like different names have been put into the presidential polls. And so I then started to look, but I still wasn't really like convinced that running for the U.S. Senate was really a good option, because I know that from an infrastructure standpoint, we have not necessarily been in the best position as Democrats. We've not had the investments made, and the state of Texas is a vast state. So I was very concerned that we lacked the organization to really get this done. So I still was like, you know, whatever.
We need to talk about an incredibly important Senate race that just kicked off in Texas, because Jasmine Crockett just announced she's running for the U.S. Senate, and her candidacy could completely change the political landscape, not just in Texas, but nationally. But before we get to that race and why it matters so much, we need to address the absolutely disgusting way Donald Trump responded to the tragic killing of Rob Reiner and his wife this weekend in Los Angeles. Because what Trump did was so vile, so inappropriate, so completely beyond the pale that it needs to be called out before we discuss anything else. In the immediate aftermath of Rob Reiner's killing, a beloved figure in the entertainment industry who's been part of American culture for decades, Trump came out and posted a screed on Truth Social basically saying that Reiner died because of Trump derangement syndrome. That was Trump's response to a tragic murder. Not condolences, not sympathy for the family, not a recognition of the loss, just making it about himself and essentially blaming the victim for being anti-Trump. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. Trump had the opportunity to walk that back. Anyone with a shred of human decency would have deleted that post and apologized. But instead, Trump doubled down on his comments. He reinforced this absolutely sick narrative that if you're anti-MAGA and something happens to you, it's basically your own fault. That's not just inappropriate. That's dangerous. That's creating a permission structure for political violence. Jasmine Crockett's reaction when asked about this was powerful, and I think captures where a lot of us are. She said she really has no words for where we are in this country, and this will be a great segue into why she's running for Senate. The fact that there aren't more people disturbed by this behavior is stunning. This stuff doesn't have to do with partisanship. She doesn't understand the moment we're in where it's acceptable for any leader, let alone the President of the United States, to respond to a tragic death before having any information by basically saying, yeah, it's because he was anti-MAGA. It's almost like Trump is giving a pass for it. It's almost like there's a permission structure that if something happens to you but you were anti-MAGA, it's okay. That is a problem. As we sit here saying we need to denounce political violence, Trump continues to fan these flames or send these messages that if violence happens on behalf of MAGA, then it's completely understandable. Crockett said she doesn't understand any of the tragic deaths that she's seen, no matter who is dying in an untimely way. And frankly, she still struggles with some things that are technically timely and asks questions about those deaths too. But the fact that this was someone beloved, and beloved or not, she thinks it was inappropriate. It was an inappropriate thought, and it definitely was inappropriate to go out and post publicly this way. Trump would have been better off living by the old adage they tell you when you're a kid. If you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say anything at all. And think about the hypocrisy here. There was this whole crusade on the right in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's killing. The right was going to seek retribution against anybody who uttered an ill word about Kirk. People should be fired from their jobs for not being sufficiently respectful. Crockett and every other elected official, every major political commentator, came out in the immediate aftermath of Charlie Kirk's killing and lamented the fact that he died. Everyone showed basic human decency. So what does Trump's behavior do to any perceived moral high ground that the right was seeking in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death? Trump immediately cut out their legs from underneath them. The hypocrisy abounds, and this is yet another example. But beyond the hypocrisy, it's just disgusting. Crockett can't imagine that anyone, whether you're president or not, would take this type of moment and let that be the conclusion you come to. And when you think about if this is where Trump's head is, think about the very complicated issues the president has to deal with. If it's going to boil down to this kind of very simplistic, really concerning thought process, it makes Crockett wonder where our country is headed and how bad of shape we're in with Trump at the helm. That's the real issue. If Trump's immediate reaction to a tragedy is to blame the victim and make it about himself, what does that say about his judgment on everything else? Now let's talk about why Jasmine Crockett is running for Senate in Texas, because this is genuinely exciting and potentially game-changing. A lot of people don't believe in Texas as a competitive state. Democrats have gotten people's hopes up time and time again. To be perfectly honest, Crockett says this wasn't a race she was looking at. She wasn't looking to run for the U.S. House when she did. She wasn't even looking to run for the Texas House when she went there. Everyone gets into politics for different reasons and runs for different races for different reasons, but ultimately Crockett has continued to walk this path that felt more like a calling than anything else. So it's definitely not an easy walk, but she wasn't initially looking at the Senate race. She was sitting in the House. Everything was flowing. She won't say it was going great, but it was flowing. Then her name started appearing in polls, different names being tested for various races. She started to look at it, but still wasn't convinced that running for U.S. Senate was a good option, because from an infrastructure standpoint, Democrats haven't necessarily been in the best position in Texas. There haven't been the investments made, and Texas is a vast state. Crockett was very concerned that Democrats lacked the organization to really get this done. But then, as things started moving with redistricting maps, Crockett got really frustrated when Trump said he wanted 5 House seats out of Texas. When the legislature acted on that and ultimately they were waiting on a lower court decision, Crockett could breathe a little because a Trump-appointed justice decided in a 160-page opinion that these maps on their face were racially discriminatory, something Crockett had been arguing the entire time. Then about 4 days before the filing deadline, the Supreme Court said they weren't going to necessarily weigh in on whether the maps are discriminatory or not, but they weren't going to allow anyone to stop them from going into effect at that moment. There had been an interview Crockett did on SiriusXM with Lori that caught a lot of people's attention. Lori asked about redistricting and the Senate, and Crockett said if they snatch 5 of our House seats, I may have to come snatch a Senate seat. From that moment, people were like, wait a minute, maybe she's serious. And when you look at the power that exists in the House versus the Senate, when we talk about saving democracy, ultimately Crockett's House seat is a safe Democratic seat. Another Democrat will fill it. But Crockett thought we need to run a different race in Texas. Democrats have always run amazing candidates with great resumes, but they have no name ID. These races are already expensive, so by the time you spend all the money to get their name ID up, people are just now learning their name, and you're behind the 8 ball in such a big state. Colin Allred, who Crockett serves with on the federal level, was known in the area where he was elected, but not throughout the state, so he had to do a lot to get known and was behind the 8 ball. Same thing happened with Beto. Beto worked his butt off, went to all 254 counties trying to make sure people got to know who he was. But here's the thing. We now have an opportunity for a Democrat to enter the race and have their name ID be as high as the person who's actually been elected statewide for almost 30 years. That's a significant advantage Democrats have never had. In addition to that, when looking at internal polling and trends, Crockett wanted to see if she could bring new people into the fold. Because at the end of the day, if we have the same electorate, we can expect the same results. We have to expand the electorate. People wondered, how do you get them expanded? How do you get them involved? But they were asking questions in polls. If these candidates were on the ballot, would you be more or less inclined to vote? Consistently, they saw a trend that people would be more inclined to vote who typically don't pay attention to politics. So with all these factors, Crockett decided to go for it because democracy requires it. And frankly, the Supreme Court needs oversight. And there's only one body that has oversight over the Supreme Court, the Senate. There's only one body through which justices are confirmed, the Senate. As a trained attorney, Crockett thinks she can add so much value listening to people as they go through the confirmation process and being able to ask them very real questions because she's been in those courtrooms and knows what to look for in a justice. When asked about her strategy for winning in a state that's shown itself to lean Republican, whether she's going for independents or Republican voters or trying to build out a new subset of the electorate, Crockett's answer was revealing. It's a little bit of both, but more focused on people who haven't been talked to than trying to win over Republicans. She brought up that Beto is the last Democrat who came anywhere near clinching a statewide seat, and he thought about adding different people to the mix. Here's the deal. They're not turning away anyone who wants better access to healthcare, education, housing, jobs. But where they're making their investments is in those people who haven't been talked to. The reason is, Texas has one of the lowest voter turnouts in the entire country. They're only turning out approximately 50% of registered voters. That means there's another 50% you can talk to. They haven't seen excitement, and excitement really matters in races like this. It can't just be enough to be anti-Trump. You've got to have people excited for something and someone, and Crockett thinks that's something she brings. She told this incredible story about a young black man at a car wash who approached State Representative Nicole Collier asking if she was planning to vote for Jasmine Crockett for Senate. This was a random conversation with someone who didn't know Collier was an elected official. When Collier called Crockett about it and they FaceTimed with the guy, he said, "I'm going to tell you right now that I've never paid attention to politics and never cared until you came along, and I am so excited to vote for you." This was less than a week after Crockett announced. This gentleman who doesn't pay attention to politics not only knew she announced, but knew what she announced for. He's planning to vote, he's registered, he just doesn't normally vote. And he was already talking to other people about her without ever meeting her. That's what it's going to take. When asked how she differentiates herself from James Tallarico in the primary, since they're both young dynamic candidates with juice behind them, Crockett pointed to experience. She and Tallarico work together on the state level, so there's a lot people can look to and understand where he stands on state issues. But on federal issues, you're pretty much just guessing and hoping. It's different when you're in the ring. Crockett also pointed to continuation of policies she's worked on, whether legislation for veteran spouses and military spouses, or reproductive access, or other issues. She can continue that fight and hopefully elevate it, whereas Tallarico hasn't played in this world yet and doesn't have these relationships built. Crockett ended up coming to the federal level because of voting rights after breaking quorum in the state house, so she's worked on voting rights legislation, which will be extremely invaluable in this moment. Another point is attracting a diverse coalition. Crockett has demonstrated real strength with diversity within the state, and she's traveled the country on behalf of other candidates, whether national or local. When trying to figure out whether to run, she wanted to see if they'd get outside help, because Texas is a big state and a big lift. They've gotten assurances from elected officials all over the country that they're ready to help and get their teams going. Before Crockett entered the race, nobody was really talking about Texas. Once she got in, there was this natural energy, whether love or not so much. That energy is going to be helpful in moving Texas to send a Democratic senator, and is a big deal for the entire country. The reason Democrats haven't been able to move important legislation is because they didn't have the numbers in the Senate. They've got to change that Senate map, and that's why Crockett is putting it all on the line. In the immediate aftermath of her announcement, Republicans, including Mike Johnson, offered public displays of joy, with Johnson doing some creepy moment rubbing his hands together. Crockett's reaction? They absolutely don't want her to be the one they face in the general. You don't normally play your poker hand and say, hey, this is what I've got. What Republicans are trying to do is a head fake. Republicans love to throw bombs over to Democrats and get Democrats in disarray. They were the first to say Biden is too old, got Democrats nervous about it, then elected an old senile man themselves. They love to stir the pot among Democrats to make them nervous. But Crockett has received information from Republican strategists that they're concerned because when you look at Obama's candidacy or Trump's candidacy, they were able to get people you couldn't even throw into polls. If Crockett is within the margin of error in any available polling, that's just telling you about people who plan to vote. Add her potential ability to bring in people like the gentleman at the car wash, and that's what makes Republicans fearful. They want Democrats to continue trying to get Republican voters and ignore the 50% of voters on the rolls who aren't voting because no one's talking to them. Republicans know they're going to double down on their people, and by the time they get to the polls, so many Republicans, no matter how dismayed, tend to come home. But Democrats are seeing swings of at least 10 points all over the country in deep red parts of Texas and further up north. Crockett thinks they can ride a bit of a wave, but they're going to have to do elbow grease and do this differently. Crockett is that different candidate who starts out not needing to get name ID up, not needing to use dollars for that, and giving people, whether they love, like, or hate her record, knowledge of what a fight on the federal level looks like with her. That's a huge advantage that no Democratic Senate candidate in Texas has ever had. This race matters nationally. If Democrats can flip Texas, it changes the entire Senate map and the entire political landscape. It makes passing legislation possible. It provides oversight of the Supreme Court. It changes confirmation battles for judges. One Senate seat in Texas could be the difference between Democrats being able to govern effectively or being blocked at every turn. And Crockett has the name, recognition, the energy, the ability to expand the electorate, and the support from elected officials across the country to actually pull this off. This isn't just another hopeful Texas race that falls short. This is different because Crockett is different. She's already a national figure. People know who she is. And she's already generating the kind of grassroots excitement that wins elections. For folks looking to help, go to jasminefor.us. They're taking volunteers and donations. This is a race worth supporting because it could genuinely change everything. Texas has been on the verge of flipping for years, and Crockett might be the candidate who finally pushes it over the edge. So support her campaign, spread the word, and pay attention to this race. Because if Jasmine Crockett wins a Senate seat in Texas, it's not just a victory for Democrats. It's a victory for democracy, for representation, for proving that even in the reddest states, when you run the right candidate with the right message and the right energy, you can win. And we desperately need wins like this to counter the Trump administration's destruction of democratic norms and institutions.